Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, June 24, 2025. President Donald Trump says a ceasefire between Israel and Iran is in effect after expressing frustration with both countries for apparently violating the agreement he mediated. The president spoke before flying from Washington, D.C. to The Hague, Netherlands, for a NATO leaders summit. House and Senate Democrats criticize that a scheduled classified briefing by Trump administration officials about the U.S. military attacks on Iran's nuclear sites has been postponed until later this week. House votes down an impeachment resolution against President Trump introduced by Congressman Al Green, Democrat of Texas, over the bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities. A majority of House Democrats vote against the impeachment resolution. As Senate Republicans are still putting together the final text of their tax cut and spending cut one big beautiful bill, with debate and votes that could run into this weekend, the Senate Parliamentarian has been knocking out bill provisions that violate budget reconciliation procedures, known as the Byrd Rule. We'll talk about what is no longer in and how senators could restore them if they want, with Forbes senior writer Kelly Phillips. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell tells a House committee that an interest rate cut in July is not likely. And Congressman Robert Garcia of California wins a House Democratic Caucus secret ballot vote to be the next ranking member of the Oversight and Reform Committee. New York Times writes that a ceasefire between Israel and Iran appears to be holding on Tuesday as Israel's military lifted emergency restrictions imposed during the conflict, and Iran's president hailed the end of a 12-day war that was imposed on the Iranian people in an address to the nation. The nascent truce came hours after President Trump lashed out at both countries for launching attacks after he had announced an end to their brief war. Within hours, however, Mr. Trump had praised both countries for seeking an end to the fighting and taking credit for delivering it. That was from the New York Times. Here's part of President Trump speaking to reporters outside the White House Tuesday morning. He uses a profanity that has been removed.
Israel says that Iran violated the peace agreement and the ceasefire agreement. Do you believe that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because the one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what they're doing. Do you understand that?
President Donald Trump with reporters outside the White House this morning before getting on the helicopter Marine One, heading to Andrews Air Force Base, then on the plane Air Force One, flying to the NATO summit in The Hague, Netherlands. On board, he again spoke to reporters about the Israel-Iran ceasefire.
How are you? We have breaking news. Everything good. Israel, as you know, turned back. They didn't do that raid this morning, fortunately. That was a big thing. Appreciate it. They had a lot of planes going, and they were going to do something, and they didn't do it. And we're happy about that. Very happy about that. So the ceasefire is very much in effect, and I think we're going to keep it there for a long time.
Did you speak to Prime Minister Netanyahu about that?
I did.
What did you tell him?
I said, you got to turn back the planes. They were going to go because, look, they hit him very hard after we made the deal yesterday. They were entitled to, but nobody thought that would have happened. But they hit him very hard, and that shouldn't have happened. And then, as you know, Iran hit them very hard last night because of that. I don't think they would have, except for the first hard hit. And I guess a missile was launched a couple of minutes afterwards, which went nowhere, which hit nothing. And there was going to be a retaliation this morning by Israel. And they said, you got to call back the planes. It's enough. It's enough. And they did, which I respect very greatly. So nobody was killed. That was the story. But they had a lot of planes going in the wrong direction. You know that, right?
Do you want any consequences for Israel or Iran for breaking?
They didn't do anything. No, they didn't do anything. They would have if I put out a statement on truth, and they didn't do anything.
Sir, how are you confident that this might not happen again? Say in a couple weeks that...
Tired of it. I think they don't want it to happen again. And Iran's not going to have a nuclear weapon, by the way. I think it's the last thing on their mind right now.
Mr. President, did Iran make any commitments yesterday about uranium enrichment?
About what?
About uranium enrichment.
They're not going to have enrichment, and they're not going to have a nuclear weapon, and they know that. They're going to get on to being a great trading nation. You know, they're very good traders, and they're going to be a great trading nation, and they have a lot of oil. They're going to do well. They're not going to have a nuclear weapon.
President Donald Trump on Air Force One with reporters as he flew from Washington, D.C. to The Hague for that NATO leaders summit. President later writing on his Truth Social page, both Israel and Iran wanted to stop the war equally. It was my great honor to destroy all nuclear facilities and capability and then stop the war. It's a story from NBC News. In a statement issued today, IDF Chief of General Staff Eyal Zamir said that Israel's campaign against Iran is not over, despite news that the countries reached a ceasefire agreement. He said, we have concluded a significant phase, but the campaign against Iran is not over. We are entering a new phase based on the achievements of the current one. We'll have more on Israel and Iran in just a moment, but President Donald Trump also said something about U.S.-NATO relations that's making some news as Politico reports it. On his way to a summit of NATO leaders, President Donald Trump undermined the alliance's core collective defense promise, injecting tension into a gathering designed to keep him interested in European security.
Are you still committed to Article 5 of NATO?
It depends on your definition. There's numerous definitions of Article 5. You know that, right? But I'm committed to being their friends. You know, I've become friends with many of those leaders, and I'm committed to helping them.
President Trump on Air Force One. A few moments later, another reporter asked him to clarify.
In your comments just now about Article 5, that will probably make some people in Europe concerned. Can you clarify what you mean? Are you still committed to mutual defense?
I'm committed to saving lives. I'm committed to life and safety. And I'm going to give you an exact definition when I get there. I just don't want to do it on the back of an airplane.
President Trump on Air Force One. It's an article from Reuters. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte played down the comments. He told reporters at the summit venue in The Hague, I have no doubt the U.S. is totally committed to NATO, totally committed to Article 5. That Reuters article continues. President Trump also posted a screenshot of a message from Rutte congratulating him on his decisive action in Iran and getting all NATO allies to agree to spend more on defense. The summit and its final statement will be focused on heeding Trump's call to spend 5% of GDP on defense, a significant jump from the current 2% goal. It is to be achieved both by spending more on military items and by including broader security-related spending in the new target. Trump singled out Spain for criticism after Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez declared Madrid did not need to meet the new spending target. That was from Reuters. Story from The Hill. The Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer of New York blasted the Trump administration for postponing a classified briefing that was supposed to happen Tuesday afternoon on President Trump's decision to bomb 3 Iranian nuclear facilities over the weekend. Schumer said he didn't receive an explanation for why the briefing was postponed, but noted that delaying it until Thursday would give Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio a chance to participate in the meeting. Schumer said senators wanted to know the results of the military strike and the scope and trajectory of the broader military conflict between Israel, Iran, and now the United States. That was from The Hill. Senator Schumer spoke in the U.S. Capitol.
Now, this last-minute postponement of our briefing is outrageous, it's evasive, it's derelict. They're bobbing and weaving and ducking. Senators deserve full transparency. There is a legal obligation for the administration to inform Congress about precisely what is happening. What are they afraid of? Why won't they engage Congress in the critical details? The results of the recent strike, the scope and trajectory of the conflict, the administration's long-term strategy to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, the potential risks facing American citizens and our service members, who we all have an obligation to protect. To be abundantly clear, neither Pete Hegseth nor Marco Rubio was scheduled to attend this hearing. If Rubio and Hegseth want to come up, I don't think they'll be informing us of very much compared to the people who will be there today. But if they want to come up on Thursday, in addition, not in replacement of this hearing, that's okay. But the obstruction of this administration on a crucial issue like this, where American lives, and particularly the lives of American service members, are at stake, is their obligation. And it undermines the very principles of accountability and oversight that safeguard our democracy.
Now, can you explain for just a moment here in terms of the briefers who you wanted? So people wanted Hague and others, but these are high-level people who were scheduled to come.
We didn't want, we don't care. I think Hague is probably just going to give us talking points. But General Kane is scheduled to come. He probably knows more about the military operations, both now and in the future, than anybody. There were good people from the State Department who knew all of the diplomatic stuff. We want to hear them.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, talking to reporters in the U.S. Capitol building. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, writing on X later, I have just confirmed with the White House that the classified bipartisan briefing for all House members will now be held on Friday. Senior administration officials will present the latest information pertaining to the situation involving Israel and Iran. Details to follow. The House today voted to table or kill a resolution to impeach President Donald Trump over the bombing of Iranian nuclear sites without congressional approval. The resolution was offered by Congressman Al Green, Democrat of Texas, and the vote to table was 344 to 79. All the 79 no votes were Democrats, but that means more Democrats voted yes to kill the resolution. Before the vote, Congressman Green spoke on the House floor about it.
In his conduct of the office of President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, in violation of his constitutional oath, faithfully to execute the office of President of the United States, and to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, abused the powers of the presidency when he disregarded the doctrine of separation of powers by usurping Congress's power to declare war, and ordered the United States military to bomb another country without the constitutionally mandated congressional authorization or notice to Congress. Cognizant of the fact that should another country's military bomb a facility within the United States of America, it would be a de facto declaration of war against the United States of America.
Congressman Al Green, Democrat from Texas, on the House floor, reading his impeachment resolution against President Donald Trump. The House later in the day voted to table or kill the resolution, 344 yes, 79 no. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, spoke against the War Powers resolution introduced by Republican Thomas Massie of Kentucky and Democrat Ro Khanna of California that would bar the U.S. military from unauthorized hostilities against Iran. The War Powers resolution of 1973 requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying the armed forces in any case where war has not been declared, and the forces must be withdrawn within 60 days unless Congress declares war or grants an extension. The law has not been tested in court. Today, Speaker Johnson said he believes it's unconstitutional.
I just want to say overall, this is America First policy in action. This is, as has been said here already this morning, the penultimate demonstration of peace through strength. This is what it means. But you got to have a strong commander-in-chief to make sure that happens. Regarding the presidential authority, now naturally, we've got some Democrats here on Capitol Hill who they have an allergic knee-jerk reaction to anything that President Trump does, no matter how noble and good. And they of course, are opposed to his latest work to make Americans safer and bring peace in the Middle East, if you can imagine that. Some have even called for his impeachment over this. It's absolutely outrageous. It would be comical if it were not so serious and stupid. Let me be clear and be as clear as possible. The strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities were clearly within President Trump's Article 2 powers as Commander-in-Chief. It shouldn't even be in dispute. Allow me to put my constitutional law hat on for a moment, because that's what I used to do, because both the law and the precedent are important for everyone to understand here. This may answer a lot of questions that you might ask this morning. The framers of our Constitution never intended for the President to seek the approval of Congress every time he exercises his constitutional authority under Article 2 as Commander-in-Chief. Alexander Hamilton argued in Federalist number 70, just for one example, that, quote, energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government. It is essential to the protection of the community against foreign attacks, unquote. This is why the framers did not explicitly set restrictions on the President when it comes to using military force. They understood something very practical about our matchless legislative body here in our Constitution. The way the Congress was set up, they knew it would be a deliberative body, and they knew that process by necessity would take time. And in an emergent and imminent situation, time is not something we always have the luxury of.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, at a news conference today. Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia, has introduced a similar war powers resolution on Iran in the Senate and says he expects there will be a vote there sometime this week. The potential escalation of the conflict among Iran, Israel, and the U.S. explored today at a Senate Armed Services Committee confirmation hearing for Vice Admiral Charles Brad Cooper, currently Deputy Commander of U.S. Central Command, nominated for CENTCOM Commander. These questions from Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts.
No one wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon, but experts in intelligence have told us time and time again Iran's nuclear program cannot be bombed out of existence. So the question is, what is President Trump's plan? Another endless war in the Middle East? Vice Admiral Cooper, you are currently the Deputy Commander of U.S. Central Command. You are nominated to be commander, but you're already there. You don't decide policy, obviously. You carry out the president's orders. So today, I just want to ask you if you have any clarity from President Trump, the commander-in-chief who chose this war, on what comes next. So, Vice Admiral Cooper, has President Trump communicated to you whether or not he could contemplate American troops fighting in Iran?
Senator, as we sit here today, and as has been well described, a very dynamic time,
yes.
Literally right now as we're sitting here, the military's number one priority is the safety and security of our men and women in the Middle East. That remains our priority. As I look to the future with the prospect of confirmation, my obligation, and in fact my duty, would be to provide the Secretary of Defense and the President a range of options to deal with policies that he would lead. And that's exactly where I would be committed.
Are you working on plans to deploy troops if the President orders it?
Senator, as you well know, we are working on plans every single day. I think this forum isn't the appropriate forum to talk about specific plans on force posture or what we're doing today. Certainly could capture that in a classified environment that I understand is
So I'm just trying to get whether or not there are plans. I'm not asking for what the plans are in particular. But I take it from what you're saying, the President has not ruled out American boots on the ground in Iran?
Senator, I think from a military perspective, it's critically important today that we provide the maximum latitude and decision space to the Secretary of Defense and the President to decide on key plans and directions, and we'll be standing by to execute those, as is our duty to do.
Vice Admiral Brad Cooper, CENTCOM Commander nominee, currently the Deputy Commander, testifying before an Armed Services Committee hearing questioned by Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts. Times of Israel writes that Iran is assessing the damage to its nuclear industry following Israel's intensive 12-day campaign against it, and arrangements have been made for its restoration. Iran's nuclear chief, Mohammad Eslami, said Tuesday the plan is to prevent interruptions in the process of production and services, he said, according to Iran's state-owned Mer News, claiming that Tehran had been prepared for damage to its nuclear sites. That was from Times of Israel. And from Reuters, U.S. airstrikes did not destroy Iran's nuclear capability and only set it back by a few months. According to one initial U.S. assessment, as a shaky ceasefire brokered by President Donald Trump took hold between Iran and Israel. 3 sources familiar with the matter who spoke on condition of anonymity told Reuters of the preliminary assessment. According to 2 of the sources, the assessment was prepared by the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency. That was from Reuters. President Donald Trump has said the strikes over the weekend completely and totally obliterated Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities. Iran launched missiles on Monday at the largest U.S. airbase in the Middle East in Qatar, none of which hit their targets. And ABC News reports that Iran unsuccessfully fired drones at U.S. bases in Iraq overnight. At today's Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, asked Admiral Cooper about what military threat Iran still poses.
Although we have dealt a massive setback to Iran's nuclear threat, which is the worst kind of threat they could pose to us, Iran still poses a severe threat to our troops and to Americans around the world, right?
They do. They possess considerable tactical capability, one element of which we saw yesterday, which we thwarted in defense of Al Udeid Air Base.
And as the next commander of Central Command, one of your top priorities will be to continue the aggressive defensive posture and to continue the deterrence that's now been reestablished against Iran to defend our troops in the region as well as all of our friends in the region, Israel and the Arab nations.
Absolutely, sir. It would be an important priority, deterring Iran in proxies.
And I know that President Trump is mindful about this, that just because they had a very weak response yesterday, which they telegraphed in advance, doesn't mean that there might not be another response in a day or a week or a month or a year or 3 years. And it could be missiles or rockets against our troops, or it could be trying to blow up an embassy around the world or targeting American citizens for terrorist attacks, something that we have to be constantly on guard against because Iran has been terrorizing America and the civilized world for 46 years. Is that right?
Completely agree, sir. We've got to be in a 3-point stance, ready to go every single day.
And at bottom, Iran didn't become a terrorist state because the United States bombed their nuclear bunkers. The United States bombed their nuclear bunkers because they're a terrorist state. Is that right?
I would agree.
Thank you.
Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, questioning Brad Cooper, CENTCOM commander nominee at today's Armed Services Committee hearing. Also testifying, Lieutenant General Alexis Grinkowicz, nominated for NATO Supreme Allied Commander, Europe. You can find this full hearing at our video library at cspan.org. The United Nations Security Council held a meeting today about Iran's nuclear program and invited to join the ambassadors from Iran and Israel. The Iranian ambassador is Amir Saeed Iravani.
Today's meeting takes place as my country faces an unprovoked military aggression that blatantly violates international law, the UN Charter, the Statute of the IAEA, the General Conference Resolution, and Resolution 2231. This Resolution 2231 calls on all UN member states to avoid actions that undermine the resolution and the JCPOA. However, with the full U.S. support, Israel has targeted Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities, civilians, and civilian infrastructure. Israel falsely justified these attacks on Iran's peaceful nuclear program as an imminent threat. This claim is baseless and has no legal base. In reality, Israel, the region's only undeclared nuclear-armed entity and non-party to NPT, refused IAEA inspections and monitoring, while Iran complies with the NPT and has subjected its nuclear program to the most rigorous IAEA monitoring. The breach of Resolution 2231 and international law is not limited to Israel. The United States, a permanent council member responsible for upholding its resolution, also attacked Iran nuclear facilities under IAEA safeguard. Third, it is profoundly troubling that even after a decade of Resolution 2231, Iran's fully monitored peaceful nuclear program has been repeatedly targeted by Israel and the United States. These illegal actions set a dangerous precedent.
Iranian ambassador to the United Nations, Amir Saeed Iravani, addressing the UN Security Council today. Also speaking there, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon.
Madam President, this council was built to uphold international law.
not to be exploited by those who trample it. Today, as we speak, Iran remains untouched by consequences from the broader international community. The same Iran that refused IAEA inspections, the same Iran that enriched uranium to weapons-grade levels, the same Iran that used its seat at the table to delay, deceive, and arm itself. Madam President, there is still time to take meaningful and decisive action to ensure that the threat of a nuclear Iran does not return stronger than before. The international community must reassert its authority. It must remain vigilant. It must reimpose the measures necessary to deny Iran the tools of destruction. It must do so before the clock runs out. We are often told that diplomacy must be given a chance. It was given every chance, every round, every channel, every deadline, but so far it has failed. The regime in Tehran never had any intention of complying. Colleagues, you know who you are dealing with. You are not engaging with a regime that negotiates in good faith. You are dealing with the masters of lies, deceit, and delay.
Israeli Ambassador to the United Nations Danny Danon speaking at today's UN Security Council meeting at the UN in New York City. Before that meeting, he held a news conference at which he suggested that President Donald Trump receive the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in brokering the ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea. It's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. President Trump writing on Truth Social, now that we have made peace abroad, we must finish the job here at home by passing the great, big, beautiful bill and getting the bill to my desk ASAP. It will be a historic present for the great people of the United States of America as we begin the celebration of our country's 250th birthday. We are finally entering our golden age, which will bring unprecedented safety, security, and prosperity for all of our citizens. To my friends in the Senate, lock yourself in a room if you must. Don't go home, and get the deal done this week. Work with the House so they can pick it up and pass it immediately. No one goes on vacation until it's done. Everyone, most importantly, the American people, will be much better off thanks to our work together. Make America great again. That post from President Donald Trump. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, spoke to reporters today about getting enough Republicans in the Senate together that agree on what should be in the bill so that it will pass.
Text is going to come out Wednesday or Thursday. Can you break it down? Motion to proceed on the bill, first vote on Thursday or Friday. Can you provide any clarity there? And, you have a couple colleagues who are outspoken with their complaints here. How are you confident that you'll have the 50 votes you need?
Well, I just think when push comes to shove, you're looking at whether or not you're going to allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. And there are a lot of things in this bill, as I pointed out. It modernizes the military. It secures the border. It brings tax relief to working families. It has the biggest spending reduction in history, and it restores energy dominance for our country. I mean, I think there is so much good in this, and when people sit down and evaluate how they're going to land in the end, you have to recognize that this is a process whereby everybody doesn't get everything they want, but I think we produced a bill working with the House, working with the White House, that will get the requisite number of Republican senators to vote for it so that we can pass it, get it back to the House. Hopefully they can take it up and pass it and put it on the president's desk.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, at a news conference. There are a couple of articles from The Hill. One is Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, one of the few Republican holdouts against the GOP's big, beautiful bill, doubled down on his criticism Tuesday, blasting the massive spending package as weak. He told CNBC's Squawk Box in an interview the spending cuts are weak, they're anemic, and they need to do more. Nothing in the bill changes the course of the accumulation of debt. The article notes that he is just one of 4 Republican senators who has voiced skepticism in the bill. Senators Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, Mike Lee of Utah, and Rick Scott of Florida have also argued the cuts to the federal share of Medicaid and renewable energy tax breaks included in the mega bill, which is full of President Trump's domestic agenda, are not enough. The second article from the Hill, more than a dozen House Republicans warn they won't support the Senate's version of the tax and spending bill because the proposed Medicaid cuts are too steep. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, took reporters' questions at a separate news conference today on Capitol Hill about the budget reconciliation bill.
Leader Schumer, what is the Democratic alternative to this bill? Isn't it correct that without some mediation, we're going to see an increase in both personal and business taxes, regardless of what is bad in the bill? Taxes are going to go up.
Okay, look, the bottom line is you will see in the amendments and reconciliation not only what we oppose in the Republican bill, but some of the things we stand for. And the public will see it. We just welcome the contrast that this reconciliation bill brings between what the Democrats stand for and what the Republicans stand for.
Leader Schumer,
okay?
You tried to get something moved last fall on AI. There's a major AI provision in this bill, the 10-year moratorium. Is that a good idea to delay that for such a long period of time?
Well, what happened in the moratorium is they withdrew the entire national moratorium. They put some strings attached to it. There's a great dispute as to what those strings mean. Senator Cantwell feels they mean one thing, and Senator Thune thinks they mean another. Okay? Last one, yes, Bolton.
You know, if there are amendments to make this bill better on Medicaid, reduce the size of the cuts, would Democrats support it to make the bill less bad?
Look, there's so much bad in the bill. It's as bad as the Medicaid is. There are so many other things we oppose. Tax cuts for billionaires, as you've heard from us many times. So I don't think that would happen. Thank you. We always, of course, we will support. We're going to see, we'll have amendments to change the Medicare provisions, and we'll see how Republicans, who have always said they don't like this vote, let me just say one other thing. Rural hospitals get clobbered. This little fund to help reimburse rural hospitals is just a fraud. There won't be even close to enough money to probably reimburse rural hospitals in any of the larger states.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, meeting with reporters. While Republican senators are negotiating the final version of the budget reconciliation bill, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, there are some provisions that may be out of their hands. Senate Parliamentarian has been going through provisions to decide which do not comply with the Byrd Rule. It's known as a Byrd bath. And joining us now to talk about that is Kelly Phillips, Forbes senior writer. At Forbes.com, you've got a pretty long list of some of the items that have already been dropped. What are they?
Well, as you mentioned, there are a bunch, so I can hit some of the highlights. I think that we expected a lot of the provisions that came out of the Banking Committee to be on that list, and they were, and that included things like eliminating funding for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which has sort of been under fire for a while, and the Senate Republicans thought this would be an opportunity to basically get rid of it, and the parliamentarian says no, violation of the Byrd Rule to put it together in this package. Another Banking Committee provision would have ended the Treasury Department's Office on Financial Research. And there's a couple of those kinds of administrative pieces that the parliamentarian just said, no to. There are some that also I think that folks have been paying a little more attention to, such as efforts to repeal those authorizations for Inflation Reduction Act programs. So that was the legislation that was passed under Biden that would provide a lot of incentives and other perks for promoting energy projects. And those have been on the chopping block. We knew that was coming, but the parliamentarian says, again, this is not the place for that. Similarly, the EPA tailpipe emissions rules There was a repeal provision inside the bill. Again, not the place for it. And then there were some smaller pieces that had to do with individual funding, such as pulling out, very famously, pulling out the space shuttle out of the Smithsonian to transfer to a nonprofit in Texas. Parliamentarian says, that has nothing to do with the budget. So we see lots of those kinds of provisions coming out of this parliamentarian review, where she's looking at the individual pieces and saying, you know what, maybe this could pass in a different bill, but for now it's not going to pass as a budget resolution item.
What is the process like to review this? I understand it's almost like a courtroom where senators make their cases. Is that true?
Well, sort of. So the parliamentarian is going to review the process. The parliamentarian's going to review the budget bill, and certain things I think are already been called to her attention. But any senator can bring something up and say, hey, I think this is a violation. Let's look at it. And in fact, a number of Democratic senators wanted to do exactly that. And that's why this is taking so long. This isn't just a let's, kind of read through it and do a checklist. This has been a process that's been going on for several days now, and it's still not over. There are still a few pieces left for the parliamentarian to look at. But again, to your point about it being a little bit like a courtroom, it is an open process, and any senator can raise the issue that they don't believe that this is going to be Byrd-proof. And in fact, again, the Democratic senators, this is one of the ways that they can get some of these items out of the bill, especially because at the Senate level, the Senate Democrat votes really don't matter. They don't need the Democratic support, but to the extent that Democrats can block those pieces from going to a vote, that's one way to get these provisions out of the bill.
We're talking with Kelly Phillips from Forbes. What happens if the Senate wants to disagree with the parliamentarian? How do they do that?
Well, so that doesn't happen very, very regularly, which is, I think, a good thing. There's something to be said for, restoring, relying, I guess, on historical precedent and then the process, because this is all about the process of reconciliation. So basically, if the parliamentarian determines that there's a provision in that bill that's a violation, it has to be taken out unless the senators vote to waive the rule, and that's a 60-vote requirement. And then there's another way that the provision can be taken out, and that's when the presiding officer of the Senate, who's currently J.D. Vance as the vice president, he can overrule the parliamentarian. Again, very, very rare that happens. It has been encouraged before. We saw it a few years back when Kamala Harris, who was the VP at the time and therefore the presiding officer of the Senate, was encouraged to pull out to ignore the parliamentarian when the parliamentarian suggested pulling out the minimum wage increase that had been proposed by the Democrats. And the Democrats were angry that provision had been flagged and wanted Harris to overrule the parliamentarian, but she did not, because, again, I think that there is a lot of respect for the idea that, this has been the rule for 100 years, the Byrd Rule hasn't been in place for 100 years, but that the parliamentarian, because she does other things, this isn't her sole job to look at Byrd rules, but that her word about Senate rules and Senate procedures is followed. Whoever is acting as a parliamentarian, there's generally a lot of respect. It's a nonpartisan role. It's rare that you'll see the senators, even when they're angry or they disagree with the parliamentarian, say that they're not going to follow the parliamentarian's recommendations.
You also write at Forbes.com that changes forced by the Byrd Rule could tip the balance of votes in the House. The original One Big Beautiful Bill Act, you write, which passed with a squeaky close vote. So what's the balancing act there?
Well, that's really interesting because we actually spoke with former chairman of the House Finance Committee, Dave Camp the other day about this, and he was actually saying that one of the reasons that this is really interesting is because usually the House and the Senate have these concurring budget reconciliations right at the time, right? So they bring these together. They've talked about them. They kind of know what each side is going to bring. When we saw these bills, we saw that they were very, very different. So you have two problems. One is that there are already differences between the Senate versions and the House versions of this bill. And now you have several people in the House saying, we don't like some of the Senate changes. And then on top of that, some of the things that they may like may be taken out of the bill. So you're looking at a bill that passed with a 215 to 214 vote initially. One or two votes completely changes what happens in the House. And again, the House and the Senate have to be in agreement for this to become law. And that makes it tricky because the House is, they've already negotiated what they want their version to be. The Senate, who hasn't voted on the bill yet, it's just come out of committee, but they are kind of negotiating with themselves at this point. And so they have to negotiate with themselves and with House leadership. And I think that becomes a very, very tricky balancing act, especially as we know that a few of the members of the House have admitted that maybe they didn't read the bill closely or they didn't know what was in it. And there are certain things that if they come back to them, they would vote differently, perhaps. So, again, that's a lot of balancing and these insanely small margins because the Senate doesn't have a huge majority either. They only hold 53 votes. And then we look at what happened in the House. We're seeing that this is definitely going to be a close vote, I think, again.
Kelly Phillips Erb, Forbes senior writer. You can find her articles at Forbes.com and on X at TextGirl. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Associated Press writing about another part of the budget reconciliation bill that's been dropped because it violates the Byrd Rule as determined by the Senate Parliamentarian. They write, a plan to sell more than 2 million acres of federal lands has been ruled out of Republicans' big tax and spending cut bill after Senate Parliamentarian determined the proposal by Senate Energy Chairman Mike Lee would violate the chamber's rules. Lee, a Utah Republican, has proposed selling public lands in the West to states or other entities for use as housing or infrastructure. That was from AP. From CNN, it's still too soon for the Federal Reserve to consider lowering interest rates, Chair Jerome Powell said Tuesday. Policy changes continue to evolve and their effects on the economy remain uncertain, Powell said in his prepared testimony for his semi-annual monetary policy report to Congress. For the time being, we are well positioned to wait to learn more about the likely course of the economy before considering any adjustments to our policy stance. Powell's latest comments come as some Fed officials have joined President Donald Trump in calling for lower borrowing costs. The Fed leader said Trump's tariffs are bound to have some impact on the economy, the extent of which remains to be seen. Reporting from CNN, Chair Powell giving his semi-annual testimony on monetary policy today before the House Financial Services Committee. Tomorrow he'll be before the Senate Banking Committee. Here's a question about interest rates from Congressman Bill Huizenga, Republican of Michigan.
I do feel like I need to touch on interest rates. Not to be a shock, you asked how the family business was doing back in Michigan. Families involved in sand and gravel and aggregates and construction and things like that. It's been strong. We need more labor. We need a few other things on that, what's happening. But I think there's no recession. That's been established. There's no hyperinflation, or certainly not as what some had been projecting. Yet there seems to be higher than expected, or certainly desired interest rates for many of us. And I'm curious how high interest rates, they hurt Americans who are paying car loans, credit cards, mortgages. Just this morning, you had FA Director Pulte asking for lower interest rates, which would obviously impact home buyers as well. So what is it that's keeping, in your mind, the Fed from what many of us believe is the right thing to do, which is to lower some interest rates, and by the way, match what the Bank of Canada, Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Swiss Central Bank, a number of emerging central banks. By the way, that's your own assessment on page 33 as where you're laying that out. Why aren't we doing what the rest of the world is doing? Is it because we're at full employment? Is it because of those tariff concerns that you said weren't part of the analysis? Was it energy, groceries, durable goods? Why?
So you're right that if you just look in the rearview mirror and look at the existing data that we've seen, you can make a good argument that that would call for us to be at a neutral level, which would be, a couple of cuts or maybe more kind of thing. The reason we're not is the forecast by all professional forecasters that I know of on the outside and the Fed do expect a meaningful increase in inflation over the course of this year. When I said we weren't going to talk about tariffs and inflation, that was to say until we see what the policies are. And so now we know a lot more. It's 6 months since I said that. So anyway, I'd be happy to continue this with you.
Thank you.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell questioned by Congressman Bill Huizenga, Republican of Michigan, at today's Financial Services Committee hearing. President Trump posting before the hearing, again calling for the Fed to lower interest rates and writing, "I hope Congress really works this very dumb, hard-headed person over. We will be paying for his incompetence for many years to come. The board should activate Make America Great Again." That post from President Trump. Headline at CNBC, Dow jumps 500 points, oil prices crater as investors bet Israel-Iran truce will hold. And the Dow was up 500, NASDAQ up 281, S&P up 67. From Fox News, the House Oversight Committee is hearing from two top former Biden administration aides this week as Republicans continue to probe allegations that ex-President Joe Biden's top lieutenants covered up the former leader's mental decline while in office. Former Domestic Policy Council Director Neera Tanden will meet with the committee on Tuesday, and former assistant to the president and senior advisor to the First Lady Anthony Bernthal will meet with the committee on Thursday. That was from Fox News. The committee chair, Congressman James Comer, spoke to reporters before the closed-door session with Neera Tanden.
This is the first of what will be many interviews with people that we believe were involved in the AutoPen scandal in the Biden administration. We have a lot of questions to ask each witness. We will be very transparent with our investigation, like we always are with all of our investigations. As soon as we learn more, we will pass it along to you. But this is the research that's been involved in the first transcribed interview. We put a lot of staff time into this. I think the American people want to know. I think there's a huge level of curiosity in the press corps with respect to who was actually calling the shots in the Biden administration. So this is the first of many people we're going to bring in to try to get the answers for the American people. So thank you for being here, and we'll be very transparent. Thank you all.
Congressman James Comer, the Oversight and Reform Committee chair, walking into that closed-door hearing with former Biden White House aide Neera Tanden. Congressman Wesley Bell, Democrat of Missouri, member of the committee, came out after the first hour and said he heard absolutely no new evidence or information, and the only thing extraordinary that came out of that deposition was that it was an extraordinary waste of time. Neera Tanden herself came out and made a brief statement at the end.
I just spoke with the House Oversight Committee, Majority and Minority Council. I answered every question, was pleased to discuss my public service, and it was a thorough process, and I'm glad I answered every question.
Was there an effort to disguise President Biden's condition?
Absolutely not.
Neera Tanden, who served as Domestic Policy Council Director in the Biden White House, speaking to reporters. From the Fox News article, the committee also has interviews scheduled with former administration officials Annie Tomasini and Ashley Williams, while seeking interviews with several officials in the Biden inner circle, including former Chief of Staff Ron Klain and former Senior Advisor to the President for Communications Nita Dunn. Biden's former doctor Kevin O'Connor will sit down with House investigators in July. That was from Fox News. From Punchbowl News, Congressman Robert Garcia, Democrat of California, a second-term lawmaker from Long Beach, will be the next ranking member on the House Oversight Committee. Garcia beat Congressman Stephen Lynch, Democrat of Massachusetts, 150-63 in a caucus-wide vote conducted Tuesday morning via secret ballot. The other two candidates, Kwesi Mfume of Maryland and Jasmine Crockett of Texas, dropped out of the contest before the vote. That was from Punchbowl News. Congressman Garcia spoke to reporters after he won.
Just first, I wanted to start by obviously thanking Jasmine, Kwesi, and Steve. They're all incredible colleagues, great friends, and I look forward to the partnerships and the mentorships. And so just want to thank them, first of all. I am incredibly honored to have been obviously elected as ranking member for the Oversight Committee. It is, I think, an opportunity for us to continue holding the corruption of Donald Trump accountable and also doing incredible work on government reform. The committee is made up of incredible members, And so I'm just very grateful to the caucus for this support. And we're going to get immediately to work. And so there is a big agenda in front of us.
What's the first item on the agenda?
Look, I think the very first thing is I'm going to go and talk to the incredible team at the Oversight Committee. There's incredible staff there. There's been a lot of turnover, as we know, at this committee for the last few years. And I'm going to let them know that we're ready for consistent leadership. We're going to uplift their work and do everything we can to hold this administration accountable and focus on the corruption of Donald Trump and also work to make our agencies better.
Congressman Robert Garcia, Democrat from California, meeting with reporters after winning the House Democratic Caucus secret ballot vote to be Oversight and Reform Committee ranking member. He'll take over for the late Congressman Gerald Connolly, Democrat of Virginia, who passed away last month. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.